Gersonova terapija metoda je iscjeljivanja tijela pomoću posebne prehrane i detoksikacije, čime se poboljšava prirodna sposobnost organizma za samoizlječenje. 20. godina 20. stoljeća razvio ju je njemački liječnik Max Gerson, pokušavajući izliječiti vlastitu migrenu za koju tada nije bilo lijeka. Eksperimentirajući na sebi, otkrio je da ga vegetarijanska prehrana lišena soli lišava mučnina i glavobolja, a preporučivši isti tip prehrane svojim pacijentima, slučajno je otkrio lijek za lupus i tuberkulozu za koju tada nije bilo lijeka. Nakon kliničkih ispitivanja, Gersonova terapija postala je poznata u cijeloj Europi, a s vremenom i osporavana od strane raznih interesnih krugova. Max Gerson odavno nije živ, ali je štafetu promicanja Gersonove terapije preuzeo njegov unuk, Howard Strauss, osnivač Gersonova instituta. Porazgovarali smo ovdje, na Rubu Znanosti. Dobro večer. Howard Strauss unuk je doktora Maxa Gersona, njemačkog i kasnije američkog liječnika koji je stvorio danas svima znanu Gersonovu terapiju. Howard Strauss također je autor knjige Dr. Max Gerson, liječenje beznadog, i također je jedan od najvećih poznavatelja Gersonove terapije u cjelini. Dobro večer.
Good evening.
Što je Gersonova terapija i na čemu se temelji?
The Gerson therapy is an organic, is a holistic holistic health procedure that is based on nutrition and detoxification of the body and supplementation with chemicals and trace elements which should be part of the body to begin with, but are generally missing by the time somebody becomes ill. So you nourish the body to make up for the lack of nutrition, for the deficiency in nutrition. You detoxify the body to get rid of years and years of poisoning of the body. And then you add minerals that the body should have, but that are lacking in its normal nutrition.
Vratit ćemo se kasnije na detalje Gersonove terapije. Tko je bio dr. Max Gerson i kako je došao do svojih otkrića?
Dr. Gerson was born in Wągrowiec in Posen. At the time it was Germany. Today it is Wągrowiec in Poznan, which is now Poland. After World War I, of course, that part of Germany was given back to Poland. He was the son of a relatively well-off, but not wealthy, but well-off Jewish oil press operator. His father operated a press for various different seeds, including flaxseed, and produced oil, and then sold the pressed cake as cattle food. It was a relatively well-off Jewish family. And so his father and grandfather were very much involved in charity, in giving back to the community, and in taking in people who did not have very much resources. That's part of the duty of a Jewish family. He had a good education. The local school system was good. There was a certain amount of anti-Semitism involved, as any pre-war German school or organization could expect. But that was just part of the landscape, and you got used to it. However, when he was supposed to go off to after high school, go off to university, he had shown a very strong predilection for being brilliant in mathematics. His family looked around and saw that there were no really good positions for Jewish mathematicians in German cultural society. So no professors, no high-ranking mathematicians. They were all stuck at the gymnasium level, being teachers, being instructors, and they had better ambitions for him than that. He had also shown an early attraction for healing. So whenever a friend of his would injure himself or in play, even at a fairly young age, whenever a friend of his would injure himself, Dr. Gerson, Max Gerson, would be the one to bind up the wound and make sure it was cleaned and taken care of. So they suggested, the family suggested that it would be better for him to study medicine because there's no ceiling, no glass ceiling for Jewish boys who studied medicine as there was with mathematics. And so they enrolled him in medical school in Germany, and he went through university and then medical school. And the medical school at the time, I don't know how it is today, but at the time, they would study with experts in a particular area of medicine at one university, and then if they wanted to study a different field of medicine, they would move to another university where that was a specialty. And so he moved around to several different universities studying with the best of the best. So far, he was being educated as a regular doctor, a regular MD, with drugs, with chemicals, with knowing how to treat people based on the common medical paradigm at the time, which was good because Germany at the time was at the peak of its science, medicine, biology, physics, mathematics. It was at the peak of its powers. This was before World War I. So he was getting a very good education. One thing, when he graduated from medical school and went to be an intern, one thing he was suffering from, however, and he had suffered from for a long time, was migraine headaches. He had terrible migraine headaches. He had such bad migraine headaches that he had to spend 3 days at a time in a completely darkened room, motionless, because he was in such pain from the headaches. Well, he figured, I'm in the center of medical knowledge. I should be able to find out how to solve this problem. And he went to all of his professors and all of his instructors and everybody who knew anything about physiology and nerve problems, and everybody said the same thing. We don't know anything about migraines. So he said, no, I'm sorry, I can't live with this for the rest of my life. If I can't find a solution, I'm going to jump out the window. So he took it upon himself to study everything he could find about migraines in any different language that he could find literature, and he, of course, was in the center of all medical literature collection libraries in the world. If he found something in a language he did not understand, he would have it translated into either German or Polish so that he could understand it. And he tried to learn as much as he could. It was very frustrating. There was no really good information for this incurable disease. But finally, in the 1700s, 18th century Italian medical text, he ran across one reference to a doctor who said that a change in nutrition, he had one patient who a change in nutrition sometimes influenced her migraine headaches. That's all it said. And he said, well, may as well try that, because nothing else had worked. There was no other ideas at all. And so he started developing an elimination diet, except the other way around. It's a gradual addition diet. So he started out with one thing in his diet. He started out with milk. He figured even babies, little babies, can digest milk. And he started out with milk, and his migraines continued unabated. Had to rethink that one. He said, okay, that's not a good one. And then he looked around at the other primates and the other mammals, and he said, he thought to himself, look, no other mammal on the planet, after being weaned from the mother's breast, continues to eat or drink milk products. And there must be a reason for that. And so he looked around at the other mammals and other primates especially, and to see what their diet was, like monkeys and apes and other primates. And he said they mostly existed from vegetable sources, plants, leaves, fruits, and so forth. And so he tried for a week eating nothing but apples, and apple sauce, and baked apples, and mashed apples, and any apples in any form he could get. And it was rather of a boring diet, but for a week he had no migraines at all. And he said, aha, now I have the beginning of two different lists: foods which cause me migraines, foods which do not cause me migraines. And over the course of a couple of years, he divided all of his inputs, all of his meals, all of his foods and drinks into into those which caused him migraines and those which did not cause him migraines. And then he had two lists. As long as he stayed on that side of the list, on the no migraine food list, he would not have his migraines. Of course, he was ecstatic, and he existed like that for quite a while. He found that the only time he actually got a migraine then was if he cheated and hopped on the other side of the list. The story then jumps forward. He was surgeon during World War I in the German army. He worked in Poland at the Charité hospital for Otto Förster, who was the preeminent neurosurgeon at the time, and who was taking care of all the German nerve injuries from World War I. And so he got quite a bit of experience in nerve injuries. And then he went out into private practice after the war and settled in Bielefeld with his new wife. And in Bielefeld, he put out his shingle, nerve and internal diseases. And a certain number of the diseases were migraines. And he would then write out those two lists for his patients and say, eat these, don't eat these, and come back to me in a couple of weeks and tell me if your migraines have been helped. And in fact, he got excellent results that way. He got such good results that he eventually had those two lists printed up as tear sheets, and when the patient would come in saying, I have migraine headaches, he would just tear one of those sheets off and say, eat these, don't eat that, and come back in 2 weeks. And he got very good results for a while. Then one day, one of those migraine patients came back to him in a few weeks and said, your migraine diet also cleared up my skin tuberculosis of 25 years standing. And skin tuberculosis had been known for thousands of years as incurable. So Gerson said, no, I'm afraid some country bumpkin doctor has misinformed you. Because lupus is totally incurable, if you ever have it, you'll never get rid of it. And the guy said, I knew you'd say that. Here are my records from 25 years of the best sanatoria and experts in Europe saying that I had lupus. And Gerson got quite excited because he saw in front of him a patient who had lupus, but who was now scarring up, and the scars were healing quite nicely. And he said, do you know anyone else with that, with lupus? And of course, from his travels and from his many stays and experts and so forth, he knew lots of people with lupus. Pretty soon, Gerson had a thriving lupus lupus vulgaris, which is skin tuberculosis, practice going. And he found that he had very good results with skin tuberculosis. What he also found, and this was accidental as well, what he also found was that when lupus vulgaris, skin tuberculosis, would clear up, almost always the patient would have some other chronic degenerative disease as well. So they'd have lupus and migraine, or they'd have lupus and diabetes, or they'd have lupus and kidney or lung or bone tuberculosis. And those would clear up as well. So he had another departure from what he had been told. What he had been taught as medical practice was, for every disease there is a treatment, and for every treatment there is a disease. And yet here he was with one treatment clearing a multitude of diseases. And he had to rethink what he had been taught about medicine and how medicine worked and how the body worked. And after quite a bit of thought and study, he finally came to the conclusion that what he was curing was not a set of symptoms defined as a disease. What he was curing was the body's own healing mechanism. So the core of the body's health mechanism, which maintains homeostasis, was what he was actually approaching. So that was another major departure from what he was taught, and that's how the therapy started, and it continued to be developed from there.
Zanimljiva je priča da je dobitnik Nobelove nagrade Albert Schweitzer imao pozitivnih iskustava s Gersonovom terapijom, toliko pozitivnih da ga je nazvao, eto, citiram, jednim od najeminentnijih medicinskih genija koji su kročili među nama. Inače, ta dvojba o uzroku bolesti ide u prošlost sve do Pastera, kojeg se inače smatra ocem teorije klica, koji je naravno smatrao da je jedna klica uzrok jedne bolesti. Manje poznat njegov oponent Claude Bernard, koji je smatrao da je klica ništa, podloga je sve. Očito Gerson se našao na liniji Claudea Bernarda. Uzbuđen zbog svojih rezultata, Gerson je njih i objavljivao 30. godina i razglašivao na sva zvona. Što se zbivalo nakon što je 30-ih proširio svoje otkrića, kakve su bile pozitivne reakcije struke, kakve su bile negativne reakcije struke?
It was an interesting response. When he started curing tuberculosis, you must remember that at the time tuberculosis was a major money-making disease for doctors. It was rampant throughout Europe, much as cancer is today. This was long before antibiotics, and antibiotics are fading as a solution anyway. But this was long before antibiotics, and so surgeons were making their money with tuberculosis, and drug companies were making a lot of money with tuberculosis. So when he started curing it with diet, some people responded well. Some people responded very, very badly because he was destroying their business. As an example, you've seen all of the beautiful, huge hotels in places like Kitzbühel and the Matterhorn, all of these ski resorts. Right? They didn't start out as ski resorts. They started out as tuberculosis sanatoria. Because the theory before Gerson was that the crowded conditions and the unsanitary conditions in cities where people were crowded together was causing tuberculosis, and that the rarefied, high, clean, pure air of the Alps would help. That was a widespread theory. When Gerson started curing people who lived down in the cities by changing their diet, all of the people discovered they didn't have to pay these outlandish, expensive sanatoria to get well. They could get well by simply changing their diet. So all of these expensive hotels, all of these expensive sanatoria had to change their business model and eventually became ski resorts. So whenever there's a disease, a big major disease like tuberculosis or cancer these days, you will see there is a large constituency making money off of those diseases and not happy to see those diseases cured or prevented, because then they'd have to find something useful to do with their time. Other doctors, like some of the top tuberculosis specialists at the time, Ferdinand Sauerbruch, for instance, the top thoracic surgeon in Europe for decades, was running a tuberculosis clinic in Munich and invited Gerson to do a clinical trial in Munich. He offered 450 terminal tuberculosis patients, and he said, if you can influence one of these cases, I'll believe everything you say. So he set up a clinical trial at Munich, at the tuberculosis ward in Munich, with 450 terminal tuberculosis patients. And after an initial trip that Sauerbruch had in keeping the patients eating properly, eventually 446 out of those 450, that's over 99%, recovered totally. 446 out of 450. This is from disease that Sauerbruch had said, if you can influence so much as one of these patients, I'll believe everything you have to say. So Gerson became an instantly recognized, world-recognized name for the treatment of tuberculosis, and he got to lecture in all the medical schools all over Europe. Doctor symposia, he went on the radio. His treatment eventually became the de facto standard for treating patients with immune system deficiencies in Germany and large parts of Europe. He published very widely. He had several dozen papers published in the finest medical journals of the time, and his writings were very much sought after and accepted, and other doctors confirmed his papers with papers of their own. And that's the standard of medical proof, is that, other people try your experiment and in fact succeed in the same way that you say that they can succeed. So hundreds of papers, literally, were published in Europe about the Gerson therapy by Gerson and by many, many other medical scientists. So there was a mixed reaction. The people who were making a lot of money off tuberculosis saw Gerson as a huge threat, and the people who were suffering from tuberculosis were very much attracted to it, and some doctors who really wanted to solve the problem researched it and used it and were very impressed by it. So there was a very definite split in how people responded to it.
Nakon svih dobro poznatih zbivanja vezanih uz Židove i nacističku Njemačku i seljenja iz zemlje u zemlju, konačno je Max Gerson došao u SAD. Tuberkulozno je kao glavnu bolest pomalo istiskivao rak i tada je on i objavio svoju knjigu Terapija za rak, rezultat 50 slučajeva. Bilo je to dosta uzbudljivo vrijeme, bilo je puno kongresnih saslušanja. Što se sve sa Maxom Gersonom zbivalo u Americi?
Actually, was outside of Bielefeld in 1928, and she asked him to come and treat her with his migraine diet because she had heard that it worked for tuberculosis, and she had been given up for dead by her conventional physicians with cancer of the midsection, And Gerson said he didn't want to approach it because he knew nothing about cancer, but she insisted. Well, he applied his migraine and tuberculosis diet to this patient, and lo and behold, it succeeded in banishing also the cancer. She then brought him two other patients, friends of hers, who he gave the same treatment to and who also recovered. So his first three cancer cases, mind you, an incurable disease, right? His first three cancer cases were cured. And from then on, he became obsessed with the idea that he had something to add to the cancer question. And he continued to learn and read and study as much as he could, anything he could find about cancer, and all he found was contradiction and theory and speculation. He couldn't find anything definite. But he continued to apply where he could the therapy. Now, having been forced to leave Germany and hopscotch around from Germany to Austria to France to England and eventually settling in the United States, tuberculosis was still a problem in the United States. They also had their theories about, moving out west to the clean air of the West instead of the industrial cities of the East would help tuberculosis, or high mountains or something like that. But Gerson showed that you could solve the tuberculosis problem with diet. The first clinical trial in the United States was done by a doctor who had visited Germany looking for solutions to tuberculosis from Saranac Lake in New York, and he brought back the Gerson therapy, and he started using it on patients, and he found that the patients were doing fine on Gerson's therapy, but the other doctors in his medical society were very, very angry with him for breaking their rice bowl, essentially, and eliminating the disease that he was curing, that they were making money treating. So he was influenced heavily to sabotage the experiment, and despite his promises to Gerson, published the results without giving Gerson a shot at commenting. So from then on, the Gerson, right away, Gerson's reputation in the United States was sullied. But when he settled in the United States, he finally he started treating tuberculosis and was very successful treating tuberculosis in the United States. But he was seeing that cancer was a growing problem. Back at the turn of the last century, it was a 1 in 50 problem. 1 person in 50 would get cancer or far less. Today, it's a 1 in 2.3, so it was already on that rise. And since he had had success with cancer in Germany, he decided to apply his therapy to cancer. And after a few stumbles, he refined his therapy, and after a few stumbles, he figured out what had to be changed and what had to be modified so that he could consistently get good results. And he consistently got good results. Now he added a whole new population of doctors to those people whose business he was injuring, because cancer was being built up as a very lucrative business to get into, because it was very painful, very frightening, and could be treated until the patient died and make the doctor very rich. So curing it was not a very popular concept, and eliminating it, so if you know how to cure it, you obviously know how to eliminate it, prevent it, right, was even less popular. So he became immediately, he was barred from any kind of publication in the United States, although the medical journals in Europe still continued to accept and print his papers. But his name, even his name, is forbidden still in medical journals. You cannot find his name in medical journals today. At one point, several of his very famous patients prevailed upon Senator Claude Pepper, who was holding hearings in Washington, to have Dr. Gerson testify in front of Congress, which Dr. Gerson did. He testified in front of Congress, and he brought with him 5 patients who had been declared incurable by other doctors, who were clearly there and alive, several years after they had been treated for incurable disease by Gerson. And the entire medical profession went bonkers. They went crazy, and they started a major campaign of slander and calumny and suppression and everything else. They wouldn't let him present. They wouldn't let him publish. They called him names in the press every chance they got, and it was he became a major enemy. But his patients loved him.
Put novca je dosta lako slijediti. Eto, Nixon još 1972. objavio rat raku, rekao je da samo treba investirati dovoljno novca i problem će biti riješen. Od tada je investirano oko 39 milijardi dolara. 1972. 220.000 ljudi umrlo od raka, 1997. 560, što znači da ta politika se nije pokazala baš najuspješnijom, ali pokazala nešto drugo. Pa možete nam možda vi svojih saznanja opisati te interesne odnose u Americi, kako funkcioniraju institucije poput FDA, odnosno administracije za lijekove i hranu, što je to sustav okretnih vrata, što je to pojam agency capture, odnosno na hrvatskom bi se moglo prevesti kao preuzimanje nacionalnih agencija.
What happens is that the pharmaceutical companies who literally have a multi-trillion-dollar a year business, the pharmaceutical companies can perpetrate all the fraud they want, and all of the and they can tell all the lies they want, and they do, and they make sure that their top executives get jobs and positions at the Food and Drug Administration. It's not Federal Drug; it's Food and Drug Administration. The FDA. FDA stands for me. It stands for Fraud and Death Administration. So they can get their own executives into the top positions at the Food and Drug Administration, and the top executives then make decisions that are favorable to their former employers. And they serve several years a term at the Food and Drug Administration, and then they leave back for private industry, which is the firm that they left to come to the Food and Drug Administration. They then get rewarded massively. This is their payoff for having made these favorable decisions. They get rewarded massively for their decisions at the FDA. This is not just a matter of the FDA. It's the Food and Drug Administration, it's the U.S. Department of Agriculture, it's the Department of Transportation. As a matter of fact, it's every agency in the federal government has suffered what's called agency capture, is where executives from one of the companies they are supposed to be regulating become senior executives at the regulatory agency, make favorable decisions for their old employers, return to the employers and get richly rewarded. That's called the revolving door, and it leads to agency capture. So the agency acts as a governmental force to force people to do what is commercially advantageous to their employers, okay? And the result is millions, billions, even trillions of dollars of benefit that go where they should not be going. That's agency capture.
Od čega se zapravo sastoji Gersonova terapija?
The Gerson therapy is based on the understanding of Gerson that degenerative diseases, chronic degenerative diseases, which are by definition incurable, are caused by nutritional deficiency, and toxicity. Nutritional deficiency is caused not necessarily by starvation, because nobody in the United States is starving. Everybody is so overfed, it's grotesque. But instead, it's the huge consumption of calories without nutritious value. So they eat and eat and eat and eat and get no nutrition. That will lead to nutritional deficiency or starvation of the life processes that you need to maintain your good health. So that's one of the problems. The other problem is that we add so much trash to our food. We add food chemicals, we add MSG and aspartame and food processing chemicals, flavorants, coloring agents, preservatives, and so forth, at the same time as we are removing the nutritious value. So we're ending up with dead, poisoned food sitting on our supermarket shelves that it looks and tastes like food, but it's not food. It doesn't nourish us. So we have to somehow reverse those two conditions. Well, when you're starving, how do you repair that problem? Well, you feed the patient food which you know to be nutritious, and that is organic vegetarian food which is grown without artificial pesticides, without artificial fertilizers, and not processed, not with a lot of salt and food chemicals added. The toxic load that we carry in our liver that is added to the problem, so we have toxicity and nutritional deficiency. The toxic load that is generally collected by our liver, but is diffused throughout our body, has to be removed somehow. And to do this, we have a very, very powerful detoxification process called the coffee enema. And that's the most powerful detoxification we know of. If we knew of a better one, we'd use it. And so we want to avoid putting in more poisons. So you want anything that's been processed, anything that's been grown with artificial fertilizer, pesticide, and so forth. Like, for instance, one of the big controversies right now is that the most widely used herbicide on crops is called Roundup from Monsanto. The active ingredient, supposedly, is glyphosate. Glyphosate. Glyphosate has been declared by the World Health Organization as a Class 2 carcinogen and has been banned in many countries. In the United States, we have officials from Monsanto now occupying the top positions at the at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and approving more and more foods that can be sprayed with Roundup and increase our load of Roundup, of glyphosate in our bodies. This is leading to all kinds of cancer. It leads to autism and other problems. So we have to reverse those processes, and the way we do it is by detoxifying the body with the coffee enemas and by re-nourishing the body, not just by eating organic vegetarian foods, but by flooding the body with organic nutrients through the use of 13 fresh-pressed juices, fruit and vegetable juices, all day long. Every hour on the hour, and another juice. So the patient gets put through his body about 15 to 18 pounds, that's 7 to 8 kilos of organic material through his body every day. That's a lot. The only way he could really do that would be with juices. In addition, we are lacking trace minerals that should be in our food, but that have been lost due to our agricultural methods and food processing methods and so forth. And so we supplement with chemicals that should be in the body, like potassium and iodine and so forth, that aren't in the body. So when we add those back in, the trace minerals that are necessary for good health are restored. So when you restore the nutrition, and when you drain off and flush out the toxins, and then give the body the trace minerals it needs, it responds with a power and speed that is amazing to watch.
Glavni institut za Gersonovu terapiju danas se nalazi u Meksiku. Gdje se još nalaze instituti i klinike koje se bave Gersonovom terapijom?
No, the Gerson Institute is in San Diego, California. There are two clinics where patients can be treated in the world. One of them is over the border in Mexico because the United States will not allow cancer to be cured within the United States. It's far too lucrative of a disease. And the other one is outside of Budapest in Dobogoko in Hungary. And they provide the full Gerson therapy, the certified, authentic Gerson therapy, to patients who stay there for, on average, about 3 weeks, and then go home and do the therapy themselves for the next 1.5 or 2 years.
Zadnjih godina Gersonova terapija dobro je primljena kod nekih japanskih onkologa. Što se na tom planu zbiva u toj svima nama dalekoj zemlji?
The first of these of the two doctors is a medical school professor named Yoshihiko Hoshino, who was diagnosed with colon cancer that had spread to his liver and pancreas. And usually that means that he is a dead man. Pancreas cancer does not respond to chemotherapy at all. And liver cancer, once it's in the liver, they tell you even God can't save you. So he opted away from conventional treatment because he knew that. He opted away from conventional treatment for something else. And he looked around and he found the Gerson book, which had just been translated into Japanese, and he treated himself on the Gerson therapy for his cancer. While he was doing that, he also treated a dozen other patients with different kinds of cancer on this therapy, and all recovered. So he was very, very impressed with this, and he wrote a book about it in Japanese. We don't have access to it in English, so we can't tell you what it says. But he wrote a book about it that has sold very widely. And he also had a friend, also a medical school professor, but also an oncological surgeon in Tokyo, who he suggested try the therapy as well. And this friend tried the therapy as well on some of his patients, and he was very impressed with its results as well, because he was getting good results. And so not only did he write a book, he also published several papers, all of which are Japanese or Chinese. His name is Dr. Watayo, Takaho Watayo. And I've had dinner with both of these men in Japan, and they're fully aware of the Gerson therapy. They use it. They've done tests on it. They've measured. They've published on it, and they published their own books on it. Dr. Watayo's book he had 200,000 printed, and they sold out in a couple of months. So it's in Japan. Word of mouth spreads very rapidly because everything is so tightly packed together that people talk a lot. And so it's very well known in Japan. I've lectured over there for a dozen years.
Jeste li vi osobno imali neugodna iskustva kao posljedicu promocije Gersonove terapije?
Anybody who gets close to it will have some experience with it. Anybody who gets close to doing, advocating Gerson therapy, writing about it, lecturing about it, anything else, will be attacked, and of course I am all the time. I opened a clinic in Sedona, Arizona, and the medical association set their dirty tricks department on us and did everything they could to put us out of business. And eventually we couldn't stand the onslaught. I run a publishing company, and we are constantly our computers are being hacked, our files stolen, our emails interfered with. It's just part of it's like my mother and my grandfather in Nazi Germany. It's just part of the landscape. You have to expect that when you're on the wrong side of the paradigm or the powers that be.
Postoje određene sličnosti i veze između okolnosti u kojima je vaš djed došao do svojih otkrića, 30 godina u Njemačkoj, i današnjih interesnih lobija, pa naravno i jednog od glavnih, a to je farmaceutski. Neka važna imena američke ekonomije i politike stalno zapravo iskaču.
The Rockefeller Foundation for Medical Research has been researching and studying eugenics for over 100 years. Eugenics is the science of culling populations and in order to eliminate undesirable genetic traits, such as he doesn't look like me. Okay, that's an undesirable trait in some places in the United States, many places in the United States. So there's quite a bit of racism and prejudice that goes on. The Rockefellers certainly had their share of it, and they had an overlay of that was that they thought that there were far too many human beings on the planet, and the human planet could get along with a lot fewer human beings, and the natural resources would last much longer. So they started studying eugenics and population control about 100 years ago. To that end, they had a Nobel laureate named Alexis Carrel working in their laboratories. He's a brilliant geneticist. He was also the world's leading theorist on eugenics, or population culling. And a lot of what he and the Rockefeller Foundation developed is now coming to fruition today. At one point, Rockefeller was a big Adolf Hitler fan. At one point, the Rockefeller Foundation sent over some experts in eugenics over to Germany to help Hitler set up his extermination camps. Hitler's long gone. The Rockefellers are still here. So there was that connection. And then the second connection between Gerson and that whole effort, the Holocaust, in addition to Hitler having eliminated most of his family and most of my mother's family as well, was that Adolf Hitler, a little known fact, it's well known that Hitler was a non-smoking vegetarian. What's lesser known is it was because he was using the Gerson therapy to treat his digestive problems that he had gotten while a prisoner of war in Austria during World War I. So his doctor, Ferdinand Sauerbruch, remember I mentioned Ferdinand Sauerbruch, his doctor put him on this therapy that he knew to be effective, which happened to be the Gerson therapy, which at the time was being called the Gerson-Sauerbruch-Hermannsdorfer therapy, which of course Hitler refused to say the word Gerson because it was so, Jewish. He would call it the GSH diet, and Sauerbruch administered it for him. And Dr. Gerson, when he found this out, didn't know whether to be proud or disgusted by the whole thing, and eventually stopped thinking about it. But that was while he was exterminating our family, of course. Hitler was on the Gerson therapy.
I naravno teško je ne uvidjeti da je upravo farmaceutska industrija koja i danas ima tako jaki utjecaj svoj rast imala baš 30. godina 20. stoljeća, kako u SAD-u, tako i u Njemačkoj, gdje je praktički bila i ekonomski motor, a čak i ratni motor Trećeg rajha.
Remember that many of the perpetrators of the Second World War, of the war and genocide and so forth, many of the perpetrators were heads of chemical companies such as BASF and Krupp Kohlechemie and so forth. They were eventually tried for war crimes and put away in Spandau for a while, but eventually released. And within about 10 years, they were back at the heads of those same companies. The EU, it turns out, is a major effort by those companies to achieve what Germany tried to achieve by arms twice, by armed conflict in World War I and World War II, domination of the world, or of Europe at least. And they decided to do it instead this time by economic and political means, making the EU one big government. So they had a single point of contact and a single point of pressure for their political initiatives. So, yeah, it's definitely an effort and an outgrowth of the industrialists who supported Hitler and the Holocaust.
Gospodine Strauss, hvala vam na vašem vremenu. Želim vam sretan put gdje god putujete i laku noć i doviđenja.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your having me on.